early this year in January or February, I forget which one it was, we had Orchids 101 and Orchids 201, 2 weeks apart at Stanley's. And we just went through a lot of material. So you're going to get kind of an overview of a lot of that today. Hopefully you can take home a few little tidbits of information that if you have an orchid or want to get an orchid, what to do with it. So let me just start out by saying this. Orchids are the largest group of flowering plants in the entire world. You may not know that, but it is. And up here, they grow up in trees, they grow in rocks, they grow in the detritus along streams. About anywhere in the entire world, you'll find these ecosystems where an orchid will grow. If you go out hiking in the Smoky Mountains in the springtime, I'd say after the freezes and frost and stuff, you should find along the streams and stuff lady slippers bloom. And you don't want to ever bother them. They are part of nature. And even if you try to dig one, you don't want to do that because you probably will kill it. And it's part of nature. So just leave them alone, enjoy them, and they're really beautiful there. Up here, it talks about there are approximately 25,000 different species. You know what that number is now, and they're still finding a new one, is up over 30,000. So you can just imagine how many different kinds of orchids there are. You go online on the internet, you can look, and actually, if you ever go to one of our orchid shows, which we just had a big one at the Knoxville Botanical Garden, just a few weeks ago. And I was I chaired that show. There were orchids there that totally surprised people what they look like. They're just amazing plants. The nice part about an orchid compared to if you put a flowering plant in your house, it'll bloom for a while and it's gone. Or if you have a bouquet of cut flowers, it'll last, if you're lucky, a few days. Then the petals start falling off. You know, this is a Phalaenopsis orchid that you can find in grocery stores, Lowe's, Home Depot, and everywhere. It's the most common for somebody that wants to start growing an orchid. It's the most common kind to have. But you know, you can take this stem and cut it off. And with it blooming like that, I had one recently, but I wanted to use it for a demo in a workshop. So I cut the flowers off. I stuck them in a vase, and that stem continued to open buds, and it bloomed for 2 months. Now that's different from having flowers in a vase from a store. Somebody gives it to you just as a nicety, or you've been in the hospital or sick or something. But you can cut off these orchid flowers and they'll bloom for a long time. Now, typically, if this is on the plant, this type of orchid will be unusual if it doesn't bloom in 4 to 6 months. And that's what's really nice. You can just put in your house. Now, everybody says, oh, God. The problem is once it's done blooming, now what? That's what we're going to talk about. Because you always want it to flower again. And the people that market these, they grow them by the tens of thousands in Canada and Thailand. They have acres and acres of greenhouses where they grow these up. Guess what they want you to do? They want you to kill it because you'll have to buy another one. It's a marketing scheme. Now, one of our beloved members just passed away recently after our show, Rosalie Peters. And she had a motto that I love. When one dies, you buy two. Because now you got an extra. And that was a motto she had. She passed that to me years ago when I moved to Tennessee and went to their first show at the mall, no less. And so anyway, there are 2 types of orchids in the world. And this listed up here is monopodial or semipodial. This is what they call a monopodial. In other words, it grows up one stalk up this way. It will continue to put leaves and flowers in as it grows up. A sympodial is, you might have heard of cattleyas. Remember that years ago, it used to have Easter corsages, the great big cattleya orchid flowers. You can't get them hardly anymore because the florists were getting rid of so many of the cattleya flowers and stuff. They became so expensive and kind of, I wouldn't say extinct, but it was too hard to get them and grow them for the flowers. So there's another kind called cymbidiums that grow a stalk like this and many flowers on this one stalk, which they can then pull off the flowers and put in corsages. It's better for the florist. However, that type of orchid, think of a rhizome growing this way. So what it does, it'll grow along it's kind of a root looking rhizome that grows along the ground or in the bark. And then a new shoot will come up. That's called the lead. And you always watch the front lead. That'll just keep going and going. And it'll grow new leaves, flower, grow new leaves, flower. And that's called a sympodial orchid. Now, that's a monopodial. In other words, like this Phalaenopsis, oh, it's the wrong way. Uh-oh, I did something wrong. Hit the wrong button. Just got to rest. That was what I'm wishing. There.
Just a second.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I can get to the right slider.
Always.
Anyway,
Which slide do you need?
it doesn't matter which slide, that's fine, because I can go to the next one. Thank you. Now, push the right button. Okay. Here's a sympodial orchid, and notice it has a new growth out the side. It has roots, it'll bloom, and then when this one is done, it'll shoot out, it'll grow a little bit further and a little bit further. So actually, that kind of orchid is more susceptible of needing repotting because it has a lead side to it. It keeps growing towards the side of the pot. Pretty soon it's growing out of the pot, down the side of the pot, and it becomes a mess. So we typically have to cut off what they call the back bulbs, the first ones that bloomed, and then repot them and move it in the pot. So the lead is always kind of at the center, so it has space to go for 2 or 3 years when it should be repotted then. So these are ways to kill an orchid. Nice, that's a long list, isn't it?
We already know all of that.
You know all that. Yeah, you can cook it, you can drown it, and so on. Improper repotting, ignoring bugs, on and on the list goes. So what we're going to talk about to hopefully deviate and get rid of some of these ways to kill an orchid is how to get it to survive and rebloom. Now, remember I said for these people that sell these, their whole marketing scheme is they don't mind if you do any one of these. So I'm going to give you some pet peeves that I have. If you go out and find an orchid and you say, oh, that's really beautiful, I want it. First off, well, it's missing in this one. There was a little card right down here at the bottom, and it should have had a little cup on it that looks like these pill cups they in the hospital, take your pills, it's a little plastic cup. Or there'll be a sign there And like the greenhouses out of Canada, they call them ice cube orchids, okay? So they'll have a little sign that says, every so often, you put 2 or 3 ice cubes in the top of that on the sphagnum moss in there. Did you know that these are epiphytes? They grow up in trees in the tropics. Now, give this plant ice cubes on their roots and they do not like it. However, their whole caveat behind that is you won't overwater it.
Yeah.
Look at that list. Third one down, desiccated. It didn't get enough moisture, so it will still die. But it just didn't get enough moisture. So my pet peeve is don't ever believe the little cup. Don't ever believe the ice cube thing. And I'll tell you what to do as a suggestion, which so far nobody's had a failure. They got their orchid to rebloom and it worked. And it's just kind of a general thing, but it does work. The other thing to make sure that you understand, sometimes you'll go into a place and they'll have a bunch of orchids and they're this bright robin egg blue color. You remember carnation, what they do to get robin egg blue carnation? They feed them food coloring. Okay, goes through the roots, up into the plant, and so on. That's exactly what they do. Now, they've taken a beautiful plant and in my world, they adulterated it by giving it something down here and it caused that plant to be. There are no blue orchids in the world, none. So once these blooms fall off, guess what color the orchid's going to be next time it blooms? White. It'll be pure white. And that's how they get those blooms. So if I were you, I would avoid getting those plants. First off, they've been poisoned by the food coloring. They may or may not survive. It depends on how they did it. But some of these growers are proud of it. They get blue orchids that are not real. So anyway, that's some pet peeves I have about what they do to these. Okay, so let's talk about the things that make the orchid most survivable. So containers. Now, when you get an orchid like this, inside this decorative pot, they always put it in this decorative pot, but it doesn't have any holes in it. Like this. There's a whole box of them on there. And I'm going to give these all away. If you just want a decorative pot to take home and you can set another pot in it, please take those. So, because I have a whole lot of them. I rescue orchids from people that don't want them. They don't know what to do with them after they bloom. They don't care about them. So I rescue them. That's the only orchids I have, about 15 now. So rescue. And I call them rescues. So anyway, there's a plastic rubbery pot inside here that when you water, you want to pull that pot out of this. Because if you start watering in this, you've now flooded your orchid because it's just going to sit in a lake under there. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But anyway, you pull that out. However, that little pot is what they grew it from the little baby. Well, do you have any idea how long from a tiny seedling to get it up to here will take?
A year.
Another guess. Close to 5 years. 3 to 5 years to get one of these up here. So it's a long process from seedlings to that. And you don't want to lose those because that's what it takes in nature for an orchid to even survive. The seeds are tinier than the end of like a pencil lead. It's so minute you can hardly see them. They have to, so And you'd be surprised how some of them reproduce out in nature. But anyway, the best pods for an orchid, and they're all different colors, is something that has air in them to the roots, because that's how they grow. Think about how the orchid is growing. And I'm gonna go down one more. See that orchid? That is the same kind of orchid as this. It always grows upside down like this. And pretty soon I'll tell you why this is bad compared to how it grows in nature. But you see the roots are strung all over the branch up in the tree, and they get their food from the birds and dust and just wrapped around the tree. And they get moisture when it rains, and when it's dry, it's okay, and so on. So orchids really like to have air around their roots. And so there's all kinds of pots, and see the holes on the sides, and so there's all kinds. These are called mesh pots, and you can see, they're very aerated. And then the really best kind are what they call a cone pot, and it has a raised center to it. So it actually comes up under the roots, and the media kind of holds up inside. So and that is really the best kind. That's what I usually use when I repot into something. And there's all sizes. There's from little orchids, next size. And when you repot, you only go up one size at a time. So if you're repotting a lot of orchids, you got to have a number of sizes. So we're going to go back. So the containers are very important. So that container in there, make sure you always take it out of that ceramic pot to water and do anything with it. So the media, there are all kinds of media. Media is not dirt. Orchids, there's only a few kinds of orchids that grow in dirt. There are terrestrial type orchids. I have one growing right in, I put them right in front of my front porch. It's on the north side of the house, and they're called Latilla. They grow right in the ground. They bloom beautifully in the spring with they shoot up a spike like that with little pink flowers. And it's called a sequential bloomer, and it just blooms next to bloom and just keeps going up the spike. And they're beautiful, but they're terrestrial. All orchids are not terrestrial. A lot of people get them and they like to throw them in dirt, but they may or may not survive in dirt because it can get too wet or too dry and just the wrong nutrients and everything. So the orchids that typically like this, they come in something called sphagnum moss. Like that, looks like that. You can buy this, especially for orchids, because it has a longer strand to it. Stanley sells it locally, so you can get a small bale of it. Now, if you're ever going to repot an orchid with sphagnum moss, you want to pre-wet this, because if you try to stuff this down in the roots, it's so light and feathery, but you have to wet it out because it actually sweats as it wets out. And it's the typical kind of media for that type of orchid. Now, if you're growing other types of orchids, I just want to give you an idea of all kinds of things that can be used. Believe it or not, some orchids are grown in these clay pellets. They're fired clay pellets called Elafor, or this one's called mica. And you can buy these online. I'm going to give you a place online that you can get any kind of thing. Some people grow orchids in lava, broken up pieces of lava. This is a bark mix, charcoal, perlite, large perlite. The best one now for bark is called Orchiata. I'm gonna lay these out. You can look at them pretty soon. And the thing that I do, if I have an orchid other than that kind, I'll mix these. I usually use Orchiata, and then I'll put some perlite in, or it kind of controls how the water goes through it, gives it good flowability for the water, and I'll put some charcoal in it. What's charcoal usually used in plants for? Hey, maybe you don't use it.
Smell.
No, actually, if you think of a charcoal filter, what it does, it pulls out poisonous chemicals. You can put that in the bark, mix some in, and it helps sweeten the bark over time and just keep some of the chemicals absorbed up. So there's all kinds of, yes.
So you don't use the sphagnum then, you just use the other three as a mix. You do it.
Oh, just if I have an orchid with a bark mix, yes. But I put a little sphagnum in it. If I'm doing a phalaenopsis, they really grow best in sphagnum moss. However, some people, I do put some in the bark mix and they'll do okay. But keep in mind, water penetration through a bark mix is different than sphagnum because that soaks up more liquid. So you have to gauge how you're going to water it. But if I'm going to do a bark mix, I mix a few of these together. Yes. I just think it gives it a better chance, you know? And so, but you know what? I experiment a lot. I'll adjust that. And that people that grow a lot of orchids in the greenhouses, some of our expert growers, they have kind of a mix that they always use. But they mix a lot of these different things I showed you together. Yes.
Is the orchid getting its nutrition from the mix, or do you usually have supplements?
So actually, we're going to talk about fertilizer in a minute.
Okay.
To quick answer your question, there's some nutrients via the mix or sphagnum, but if you enhance it, it's even better. So, and we'll talk about fertilizer in a minute. So there's all kinds of things you can do. This is kind of a mix. I have some little pieces of perlite in with some Orchiata bark. I used to say Orchiata. They do have some of this at Stanley's too. Orchiata, if you go to buy orchid bark, it's a pine bark that they've harvested. They chop it up and so on. Orchiata is a special pine bark from New Zealand, and they process it in a certain way, which is really nice because once you use Orchiata, you don't have to repot your orchid for probably another 4 to 5 years. However, if you use the regular orchid bark, which is a pine bark, it will look like dirt in about 2 years or 3. So it's a matter of how long you want to it's a little more expensive for Orchiata, but hey, 4 to 6 years of not having to repot is a nice plus, believe me. And if you use something like lava or the Aliflor, you don't hardly ever have to repot because it's lava doesn't disintegrate. These clay pellets don't disintegrate. And if you do repot, you just kind of sterilize them in dilute chlorine bleach water, then rinse them real good and just use them again. So it works. So there's all kinds of things, but most people have this kind of orchid, and typically 2 to 3 years repotting is the best for it. Now, temperature.
Question.
Yes,
Okay, I kill those, so just,
you kill. Are you a
in 2
killer?
years, I would be a killer.
You're a killer.
But if it happens to survive, how would you know you have to repot it?
Okay. Probably for this kind of orchid, I would just think every 2 to 3 years you should do it. Now, if it's growing up and up and up, and you start getting a lot of aerial roots coming over the side of the pot and out, Aerial roots are fine if you have, hopefully, a little humidity, because they'll be fine. I'm gonna show you what a good root and a bad root looks like in a minute. If it's getting really growing out of the pot, then it really is time to repot. And like I said, these have been growing so long in these pots when you first get them from the store. If, once you take stuff off the bottom, you'll actually see the initial little, it's a little peat thing that's about an inch square that they started the seedling from. And it's still in there with sphagnum around it. So it's been in that pot for a long, long time. The first thing, once this is done blooming, it probably should be repotted. And if you've been keeping that for a long time, it really should be repotted. So, but you just have, I gauge it every 2 to 3 years, just as a standard. Yeah. And you never want to do that when it's blooming. That will shock it, and it may drop the bloom and stuff. Now, temperature.
Light,
Huh?
talk about light.
Oh, light. These orchids like indirect good light. So if you have a east, south facing window, especially in the wintertime now, they don't mind some sunshine direct, but not for a long, long time. If you have something, a thin shade or something in front of it that breaks that sunlight, that's probably better. They do like a lot of light, and they need that to get ready to bloom. So they need light. Do not put them in the shade where they can't get any light. But if they're in strong sunlight, it will burn these thick leaves, and it'll look sunburned, and it'll get a brown block, a splotchy thing, or a black spot on it. But they do like a lot of light. Now, there are certain orchids, lady slippers don't like as much light. Cattleyas, on the other hand, like lots of light. So the best thing to do is look up on the internet. And if you don't know what this is called, I'm going to give you the name of it. Because if you go out and look on the internet and take this name, it will tell you some key things that we're talking about. This is called a Phalaenopsis orchid. PHALENOP SIS. Phalaenopsis. If you Google that word or search on that word, it will give you care profiles for it. So, and as far as temperature goes, here's a caveat that a lot of people don't really realize about. They like 60 to 80. That's their prime, okay? However, if it's done blooming and it's in the winter time, it's preparing for the next blooming cycle. And you can force it a little bit, because in nature, this is what happens. If there's a 10 or 15 degree difference between day and night for at least 3 weeks or so, that will kick that plant into high gear for getting ready to bloom. So you say, okay, in my house, well, it's kind of, it stays the same temperature. Well, you can move them closer to a window at night, as long as it's not freezing. And, the temperature goes down on that window surface at night. As long as it goes down 10, 15 degrees from daytime, that's a perfect thing to do for that orchid in the winter time. Give it a shot, because it kind of kicks it into gear, like, oh my God, something's changing. So, it gets ready it'll maybe shoot a spike earlier than usual. That's one thing about temperature. Otherwise, there's the ideal temperature for this kind of orchid between 60 and 80, but it can go higher. It can go a little bit lower, but you don't want to get in the 40s. So if you have them outside, make sure before they get into the 50s below, you get them inside. Which I'm going to skip one because some people like to put their orchids outside in the summertime. Make sure that you spray them with an insecticide before you bring them in, because there's all kinds of crap outside. And down on pest control, there is I should have brought the bottle, but there is a spray called Complete Insect Control. I think it's put out by Bayer. You can get it at Home Depot and stuff, but it's called Complete Insect Control or something like that. If you just mix up some of that and spray it under the leaves, over the leaves, and spray it kind of good, let it dry good before you bring it in, that will help get it ready to bring in. The other thing you can spray it with is get a sprayer of neem oil. It does pretty good. Okay, let's go back to humidity. You know, I don't have humidity control. I don't have agreements. Whatever I grow is inside is at the mercy of inside. So the humidity is not high where I have it. It's on a south facing patio door in front of it. And so humidity is not high, but because I keep them watered, the root tips look okay and they appear to be humidity. If you can keep that humidity somewhere in the 40 to 60% range, you're doing okay. If you have a humidistat, you can measure or set it there. So if some people like to take them in the bathroom, and you know it's a little higher humidity, but I wouldn't leave them in there all the time, because unless you got a window that's giving them the light they need, then they're in the dark, and that's not good. And then you have to cart them back and forth. So just, it'll work fine, even if you have them in a windowsill, they'll typically work fine.
So is high humidity okay?
Higher humidity is fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Some people like to mist them. But here's one thing about water. You remember that picture I just showed of the Phalaenopsis growing like this? A monophodial orchid like this, where the leaves are coming out, that's the crown. And when it's growing upside down, that crown is facing down this way. So guess what? When it rains, it just lands on here. The crown doesn't get wet because it's hanging down this way. See, they do things in nature that we don't do when we're trying to keep it inside. So you have the orchid sitting like this. You don't have to sit like this unless you have a hanging basket or something. You grow it like that. So if you get water in that crown, guess what's next?
Right.
Rot. And you're done. If water gets in that crown and starts getting black, brown, yeah, but go out and buy another one, because it's done. You cannot reverse that. The bacterial rot is horrible. So, best thing to do, always water in the morning. Give that orchid time to dry out during the day. If you do miss or you do get water down that ground, use a Kleenex, a paper towel or something, and kind of dab it down in that ground just to get the bulk out. You'll do yourself a favor, and you'll do that a favor if you do. Yes.
Oh, what we've done before is taken that inner little pot out, put it in the kitchen sink, and maybe I've been mad, but I've just let the water run down through it,
Okay.
turn the water off, and then just let it sit in the sink. for a minute.
Okay, we're gonna talk about watering, and that goes right along with what you just said. Watering. This is what I tell most people, and it typically works okay. And hopefully doesn't create a mess. Some people run water through it. You're using a lot of water. Okay? Some people miss. That's maybe getting enough water, but maybe not sometimes. If you, every 7 to 10 days, typically, if you'll just get a little bowl of pot, you know what I use. If you've ever been in the hospital, they give you these little bed pans that have stuff in them and stuff. I have a whole collection of those things, and they are great for working with orchids. And I'll if you just put the fertilizer water, we'll talk about fertilizer in a minute. If you put the fertilizer water in there and set that little pot in there every 7 to 10 days, you can kind of feel it. And if it's really dry, or just make a schedule. Every 7 to 10 days, you do it. If they go a little bit longer, it's not going to hurt. But if you'll set that pot in there and let it soak for about 10 to 15 minutes, take it out, drain it back in that decorative pot if you just like a decorative pot. You'll be fine. And the orchid will get enough. So it's an easy way to just kind of have a standard regimen for doing watering. Now, put fertilizer with it. Here is something a lot of people fail to do. If you go out and buy some orchid fertilizer, and I really recommend the kind that is water soluble, it's a granular. You can use the liquid, but there's the granular ones. There's all kinds out there. And if you look at the directions, it'll typically tell you a teaspoon per gallon of water. Put that in like 3/4. In other words, use an 1/8 to 1/4 of a teaspoon per gallon, but fertilizer each time. They call it weekly. You see what I mean? WEAK, WEEK. So you're actually giving it just a little bit of fertilizer or nutrients. Orchid fertilizers have a whole lot of what they call micronutrients in them, which they would get in nature that they don't get otherwise. And it's really best for them. If you want to add a little zip to it once in a while, once a month or so, put in a little tiny bit of Epsom salts, and you'll be amazed what that will do to a plant.
How often do you?
Oh, once a month, just a little bit of Epsom salt. Magnesium and calcium are needed for that plant to move the other nutrients. So that little bit of magnesium that's in Epsom salt, and you can use that on all of your house plants. And it's amazing what changes you'll see in the growth cycles of regular plants with magnesium or from Epsom salt. Now,
How much of that would you use
maybe an 1/8 of a teaspoon
per gallon of water?
per gallon of water. Yeah, not too much. However, every 4 to 6 weeks, don't put the fertilizer in, just use water. Because over time, your salts build up from the fertilizer, even with minute amount. So it just helps the plant to kind of drain some of those salts out by using just water. But you can gauge it however you want. And now, these kinds of orchids are going to be beginning into their blooming cycle typically now. So as they're putting out new roots and stuff, you fertilize them. And once they stop blooming for a little bit, you'll let it rest just a little while, but not too long. And then you start fertilizing again to get into the next cycle. So, yep. Any questions on those things? Push the right button here. Okay, there's that plant sitting upside down. There's another one. That's a typical one you see in the store, the flowers. But you notice how it's sitting on the side of a trunk, and so it drains well. These are called pansy orchids. They're beautiful orchids. They have a great fragrance. Now, this is a common pest, mealy bugs. If you see these white fuzzy little things on the undersides of these leaves, you better get it separated from the rest of, if you've got more than one plant, get it separated. A good way to get rid of those is use a cotton swab or a cotton ball or some. Use isopropanol to wipe as much as you can. However, you really, that insecticide that I mentioned, complete insecticide, you really need to spray that plant thin. You're gonna have to spray it every 2 weeks for at least 3 cycles or more, 3 or 4 cycles, because these guys are producing eggs by the millions. They're also down in the bark, so it's a good time to get them out of that pot or out of the media, and whether it be sphagnum moth, get them out of that media, spray the roots, spray the whole thing, put new media on them, because these things will kill it. They suck the life right out of the plant. And
Where does it come from?
Huh?
Where do the mealy bugs come?
everywhere, they're everywhere. Here's what happens typically. If it gets stressed a little bit, it's too dry or too wet or something, that's when they tend to show up for some reason. The other one that will show up is called scale. Now, it looks like it's fastened there, but it's producing eggs by the millions also. Same way, they're harder to get rid of now. Scale is horrible. So you wipe as much off as you can and then start treating. But it can be a sad loss because it's just a cycle that you have to go through with the plant, but get it away from your good plants if you have more than one. Oh, there it is. I did put a picture in. That's the stuff that a lot of people use for spraying. I guess, anyway, if you want. Yes,
What causes the black spots on white orchids? I've had that happen.
on the flower itself,
Yes, exactly.
black spots.
Yes, like a small black spot.
Okay, it could be one of two possibilities. One might be, do you get water droplets on it by spraying or something?
No, when I had gone in to purchase a couple of orchids,
Oh.
I had noticed that a lot of them had this on the actual floral part of the flower. And I mentioned it to the florist and I said, I think there's a disease, but I said, I'm not sure. Because every single one of them had it except for two.
Yeah, it could be one of two things. They may be spraying them and they get droplets on. And the other thing, it could be a virus.
Like virus.
Yeah, and there's, do not buy those plants.
I did.
If they, have you reflowered it
Yes, I have.
and did it have black spots?
No, it didn't.
Well, then you got by that. More than likely, it might have been this, droplets
I
from the
think
flower.
it must be.
Yeah, yeah, that's probably true. Okay, these, one way to increase humidity is you can have a tray, put some rock in it, put some water in the bottom of the tray, set your orchids on. Do not have the pot sitting in the water, but up on top of the rock. That will provide some humidity around them. I don't do that anymore. That's a Cattleya. Let's see, I've gone past these. There we go. That's a lady slipper growing out in nature. They usually have a little pouch in them. And that's a terrestrial orchid have in front of the house. It's called, it blooms like they call it lady tresses in a spiral around it.
Do you dig those up every?
No, no, they've been in the ground. They get some leaves on them in the fall, but they've been through 4 winters so far.
Right.
The other one's Blatilla. That's what the Blatilla looks like. Grows in these spikes and they're sequential bloomers. They're just beautiful.
And that's a terrestrial orchid?
Terrestrial. I've had them in the ground 4 years.
What's the name, please?
Blatilla, Bletilla. They have a little bulb looking thing and these little bulbs just keep spreading and then you can divide them and spread them and spread.
So if you have an orchid you really like and you want to make baby orchids, they do that.
You carve
Don't,
yourself a little seed.
just don't do it. Yeah, it takes special environmental, when they do seed, which the Blatilla do, mine seeded this year. But if maybe some of those seeds will grow in the ground, I don't know. I could send these seeds into a hybridizer. They have to actually grow. They actually germinate them in what they grow bacteria in, agar, and under a laminar flow hood, and don't grow little ones. Now, something that can happen to these. Once it's done blooming, if you left the stem there on the flower spike and it stayed green, it might produce a flower off to the side of it. That's called a keepy. That's Hawaiian for baby. And you let roots grow on it, then you can chop it off and plant it in new media. However, it'll be 3 to 5 years to get it to bloom. Now, one thing that's really important that I have bypassed, what to do when this is done blooming. This flower spike needs to be cut off down close to where it comes out of the main body of the plant. And I always leave about a 2 or 3 inch piece of it. So I can, if I repot it, I can go women's clock clip like this. I have lots of them. The dollar store loves me. And you clip that leftover spike, one that was on the stake, and that holds it in place while it gets used to its new pot without jiggling in it. It's a way of supporting it. Now, anytime you cut a plant, it can be any plant, including that spike, and it's fresh. What do you think is the best thing, disinfectant, to put on a plant where you've cut a live surface off, including that spike? What do you think is the best disinfectant?
Witch hazel.
Huh?
Witch hazel.
Witch hazel, moonshine. Anybody else?
Alcohol,
Alcohol,
side,
peroxide. Best one is cinnamon.
Oh.
This is the best disinfectant in the entire world. Just sprinkle cinnamon on it. Any plant that you cut a live surface or this spike, or you cut a live root or something, sprinkle cinnamon on it and just let it set for a little bit to dry and cure. Best. Just plain old cinnamon, and that'll make that plant smell good too. So. It's 5 minutes to 1. You want to do your thing? This is all, the other slides are about repotting, and that would really be another whole thing. So, I'm going to go on through.
Just briefly, yeah.
I'm going to very briefly go through these. Okay, this is the pot that we're going to take out, the plant. And by the way, you see the roots on these, if they're kind of a grayish looking and they're dry, they have a vellum on the outside. And that is what soaks up the water and nutrients for the, the root is inside. That root may be pretty good size, the size of a pencil, big, some are big. The root inside is the size of a thin wire that goes down through the center of it. That's the root. It's not that big part. But anyway, if it gets wet and it turns green, that's a live, good root. If it stays mushy and gray, brown, it needs to go. It's bad. And you can see, we usually take the old media off of it, and always inspect the roots and see how these are all nice and green. And there I'm clipping off the old roots that are bad. And then I usually I'll put some stuff in the bottom of the new pot, set the orchid kind of down loosely down, but you need to get the top of the plant even with the top of where it sets in the media back in the new pot. You don't put it deeper or higher or anything like that. About the same. Then you carefully move new sphagnum moss down inside the pot around the roots without trying to break, carefully not to break the roots. And then you end up with a newly potted plant. It really doesn't take long from start to finish. I mean, you can usually do one in 15 or 20 minutes without too much trouble, unless it's really packed in. This is what I want to get to. Here's my phone number and my email. If you have a question, want to know something specific, feel free. I would advise writing first via email, and that's when you talk to kids.
Thank you very much. She did a great job of sharing information. And we do